I'm reading an article here from 1938 or Sturmer about the Spanish Revolution or the communist invasion of Spain. I only included the Google English translation in my video, but on the left you can see the original first page of the Der Stürmer where I'm getting it from. So it says the newspaper Domingo Sunday, is published in San Sebastian in national Spain. In its issue of April 3rd, 1938, it carries a seemingly disturbing report by the political writer A. Martinez Thomas. It is entitled Maniobra del Judaismo contra España. In German or English, Machinations of Judaism against Spain. The author writes, quote, a few years ago, in February of 1932, I tried to warn the Spanish people of a great danger. I wrote an article in a weekly magazine in Barcelona. In it, I pointed out that the Jews of Europe had developed a dangerous agitation against Spain. It had been brought about by the Spanish Revolution. More than 400 years ago, the Spanish royal house had presented the Jews with the choice of either emigrating or being baptized. A large number emigrated, a small number were baptized. Since that time, there have been no Jews in Spain who publicly professed the Mosaic faith. There were probably numerous Jewish families who secretly adhered to their right and who strictly intermarried, thus preserving their Jewish blood. On my note, unfortunately, there was probably a tremendous amount of Marranos and crypto Jews in Spain before and after 400 years ago. Anyway, continuing, these Jews were Spanish people. Spanish people called them Marranos, which means pigs. I never knew that. When the and it's funny, the Jews, I guess, accepted that term, the Marranos. Like, oh yeah, we're pigs. When the royal family was expelled and the republic was proclaimed, a strange and zealous propaganda immediately began to make itself felt in the Spanish press. The return of the Jews to Spain was demanded. These Jews had settled throughout Europe over the centuries. They called themselves Sephardi Jews. This word comes from the expression Sepharad, which is the Hebrew name of the I guess maybe the Spanish Peninsula. The Sephardi Jews had settled in the Mediterranean countries, then in France, England, Germany, Romania, etc., etc. Now, the return to Spain should be open to them again. The Spaniards believe in the Jewish lie. The Spanish press was bribed by the Jews, or it was written by Jews. With contempt or with wild insults, the newspapers attacked the former Spanish royal family. They described the Spanish royal family's actions against the Jews as that time at that time as brutal and inhumane. They declared that the expulsion of the Jews from Spain had resulted in the decline of that country. The Spanish minister Fernando de los Rios, a Marrano Jew, had this claim taught to young people in all schools. That's interesting. The Spanish minister, so was he a Catholic? Was he quote unquote Christian? But he was a Marrano Jew. He was really a Jew pretending to be Christian, is what I'm taking away from that. Anyway, continuing, the Spanish people believed the claims of the Judaized press. They created the illusion of a coming rich Spain. The Jews, the Spaniards said to each other, will bring money into the country and get business flowing. Spain will tremble with activity. Israel's men will create, right? Jews will create brisk trade thanks to their business acumen. The Spanish people were ready to welcome the Jews hospitably. The Jews drew up an immigration plan. In January of 1932, a mission of well-to-do Sephardic Jews traveled to Spain. They initially sought the city of Barcelona. Then they traveled on to Madrid and Valencia. Their task was to prepare the ground so that the Jews could descend upon them like swarms of locusts. They knew this had to be done in a gradual and cautious manner, a manner typical of the Hebrew faith. They published an appeal to the most important newspapers. In it, they declared that it was premature to speak of a return of the Jews to Spain. However, they only made this declaration so that their racial comrades could settle and establish themselves in Spain more easily and inconspicuously. In the meantime, Jewish immigration had already been organized. 500,000 so called Sephardic Jews were ready to go to Spain and settle there. They came from the Balkan countries, from Asia Minor, from North Africa. The powerful bankers and the Jewish financial kings in London and New York, as well as the wealthy Jewish uh, Altos, I'm not sure what that means, Altos communities in Europe, had pledged their support for this immigration. They collected and donated funds under the slogan Return to Spain. They were aware that now, after the expulsion of the Spanish royal house and the introduction of democracy, their time in Spain had come, the time for the fulfillment of their promises. This country was now ripe for conquest and Bolshevization. A generous immigration plan was drawn up, and it was to last for 20 years. The quotas, immigration numbers, that were to be reached each year were precisely determined. The areas in Spain that were to be flooded with Jews were also specified. The Jewish conquest of Spain begins. Shortly after the issuance of this plan, the Jews began to settle. Jewish families and clans moved to Spain from Salonika, Smyrna, Alexandria, and Tangier. They initially settled in the capital and in Barcelona. They brought no money, but they intended to seize the money and wealth of the Spanish people. They occupied themselves with haggling and foreign representations. Jewish immigration to Spain received a new boost in 1933. It was the year Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany. Numerous Jews had to flee that country. They also invaded Spain. During that year, train stations and seaports were filled with ever increasing crowds of Jews. More and more Jewish faces appeared on the streets. Once again, the Judaized press was at work. It aroused the Spaniards' sympathy for the Jews who had fled Germany. Man, don't we see that in the world press today about Israel, right? About the Jews today? Anyway, it condemned this barbaric country. It demanded mercy toward the unfortunate Jews. The faithful Spaniard heeded this call. He received the Jewish immigrants from Germany with the same hospitality as he had received the Sephardic Jews from the Balkans and Mediterranean countries the year before. In 1933, a total of about 20,000 Jews immigrated to Spain. This frightening flooding of Spain increased every year. 1935, 11,000 Jews received Spanish citizenship. In Barcelona alone, 4,000 more citizens of Jewish descent scattered throughout Catalonia. Oh, so that was 11,000 just in Barcelona. It's crazy. In some towns on the Catalan coast, such as Tossa del Mar, etc., the Jews had already formed extensive migrant communities. In addition to Barcelona, the Jews flocked to Madrid and Valencia. Soon, these cities and their surroundings also housed tens of thousands of Jews. In Barcelona, they built up a synagogue on Montaner Street, while the Bolsheviks plundered, desecrated, and burned the Catholic churches. Nothing at all happened to the synagogue in Barcelona, right? Because all the Bolsheviks were Jews. That's why they didn't burn any synagogues. There, one can still hear the rabbis speaking and the Jewish crowd murmuring their Hebrew prayers. The Jews begin to Bolshevize and murder. The events that followed in Spain clearly showed the consequences of Jewish immigration. The Jews pursued the Bolshevization of Spain by all means. They wanted to establish Jewish tyranny, but the Spanish people rose up for freedom. They rose up in all the areas that had not yet been ravaged by Jewish immigrants. They declared their allegiance to Franco, the new leader of Spain. But where the Jews gathered in their thousands and tens of thousands after they had settled in Spain, the most terrible misfortune befell the Spanish people. They fell into the hands of the Bolsheviks, right? The Jews are Bolsheviks and the Bolsheviks are Jews. They fell into the hands of the Jews. Already in the first month of the war in Spain, more than 2,000 Jews defected to Red Spain. These and the larger number of Jews who had already migrated exploited the disastrous war in their own way. They traded in uniforms and food, in looted furniture, junk, and art objects. The war in Spain was a huge and profitable business for them, right, for the Jews. When General Franco's army approached, they began to recruit non-Jewish fighters, quote unquote non-Jewish fighters. The Jew Gima Meden published a book in Barcelona entitled The Jewish Fighters for Freedom. In it, he reported that 10,000 Jews volunteered for the Bolshevik army. However, these Jews never went to the front. They stayed in the cities of Madrid, Valencia, and Barcelona. There, they harassed, terrorized, and murdered the Spanish population, right? The exact same thing that happened in Russia. So, and Ukraine and all Eastern European nations. Anyway, continuing. But Judaism is, but Judaism also shows in other ways that the cause of Bolshevik Spain is also the cause of the Jews, right? It's one and the same. The Catalan Bolshevik newspaper La Humanitat reports that Jews in America transferred over $3 million to Bolshevik Spain. In reality, however, the Jewish remittances are considerably higher from Hollywood alone, right? Because Hollywood, even back then, was entirely Jewish. The Judaized film city, Red Spain received $1.5 million in 1937. That is crazy. That shows how long the Jews have controlled Hollywood and been molding the minds of the retarded Americans, right? So by 1937, what retards in America are watching on TV was already Jewish. So by 1939 and then 41, when the Jews got the U.S. involved in the war, there was no chance that the American people were going to be able to see another side to the conflict, to be able to see the actual truth of what was really happening. So, anyway, continuing, the end of Jewish Bolshevik Spain is coming. Now, Bolshevik Spain is completely in the hands of the Jews. The Spanish industrialists and householders were either murdered by the Bolsheviks or robbed of their property and businesses, right? Again, exactly what they did in Russia, Ukraine, Hungary, Romania, what they were trying to do in Germany, the Baltic nations, etc. Jews took their place, right? They replaced the non Jews. The entire industry and trade in Spain in need has thus fallen into their hands, right? The Jews' hands, even from a purely external perspective. In all towns in northern Spain, it is clear who is in charge and who is in power. The Jews are well dressed and sit lazily around in the masses, hotels, and restaurants. The saviors, however, right? The saviors, however, right? I think it satirically or insultingly, he's saying, however, skulk through the streets, ragged and starving. But the Jews know that their rule will not last much longer. But the Jews, I don't know if that's a proper translation. Um, oh, it may be, but the Jews know that their rule will not last much longer. These parasites are now trying with all their might to squeeze the bare bones out of the Spanish people. They are the ruthless and terrible body snatchers of the Spanish War. But fortunately, the end of their plundering power has already been foreseen. Franco, the leader of the Spanish people, will win. He will cut off the head of the accursed Jewish beast, the Jewish beast that was expelled from Spain more than 400 years ago and that has now invaded Spain to exercise its barbaric and diabolical prey on this unfortunate people. The Sturmer is pleased that there are men and newspapers in Spain who are leading the fight against the Jewish world enemy so courageously and farsightedly. The fact that in national Spain, awareness of the Jewish question is beginning to develop in this way is a good sign for the Spanish people. I think, is that it? Yep, that is it. It's unfortunate that Franco and the Spanish people did not entirely fight with Germany during World War II. I mean, there were tens of thousands of brave uh, Spanish who fought for Europe and fought with Germany. It's just unfortunately, for whatever reason, Franco wouldn't commit, which would be probably maybe another interesting video. So.